getting in early, picking on things, trying to play with it, find out if it works, particularly at the moment with AI, and then passing on that knowledge, I think is really useful. And it just takes one person to use it in a really fantastic way. And everyone goes, wow. And that's always been the case with technology, isn't it? I think the really valuable professional services people are the ones who try and change their environment for the better.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello, I'm your host Sarah McCluskey, and you are listening to the Research Adjacent podcast. In a minute, you'll be hearing from today's guest, Andy Tattersall. Now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, Andy is either based at the University of Sheffield, or if it's after summer 2025, he is now freelance. Andy doesn't fit neatly into typical job categories. I first met him through podcasting, but I had also seen him writing a lot about the social media use and the tentative rise of Blue Sky. Well, it turns out what he really specialises in is using technology to solve communication problems, and suddenly it all makes sense. A latecomer to education, he has evolved from a pirate radio DJ into a research communications specialist. We talk about his constant drive to make things better, why universities can be slow to adopt new technologies, his love of good conversation, and why he would use his magic wand to improve CPD for everybody. Listen on to hear Andy's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Andy. It is fantastic to have you here as a guest and kind of on the other side of the microphone for you, although I'm sure we will get to that shortly. Could you tell us a bit about what it is that you do?
Okay, so thanks for having me, Sarah. And what do I do? This is a tricky thing. Even some of my colleagues will ask me this, what exactly I do. And some have claimed in the past, all I do is mess about on the internet. But what I do, I think in essence, what I am is a troubleshooter and a creative ideas person. And my job title, which is one I came up with and finally managed to squeeze through at the University of Sheffield, was Open Research Communication Specialist, because I think that's what I do. And before that, I was an information specialist. So my work, I think, is between the sort of the intersection of communications, because my first degree is journalism, and information science, because that's my master's degree, underpinned by a practical set of skills that allow me to make stuff to solve problems and to help people primarily communicate their research, because I work in health research at the moment. But as you'll know, at the point of recording this, I will be leaving University of Sheffield in a few months' time to go do this on my own for other people. So I think really that is it. And the way that people may understand it is that I see myself a bit of a research equivalent of a learning technologist. And I don't think I necessarily exist, because people are either a marketing person, or they're learning technologist, or they're a scholarly communications person. And I think I do bits of everything. I'm a jack of all trades and maybe a master of some. That's what I am. Yeah.
So when you say you do lots of different bits, tell us a bit about some of those different kind of projects and things that you're working on, or technologies that you use.
Examples might be, so I was part funded by the NIHR in terms of knowledge, mobilizing NIHR research into local government, sort of like make some kind of an impact. So the kind of things that I've done there as part of that work is make an infographic. It might be make an animation that explains what we're doing, but also only this week I put together a public engagement event as part of a festival that runs over a month in Sheffield called Festival of Debate, where I had colleagues who I work with on this project, along with the Sheffield's Director of Public Health, Greg Fell. And I had those turn up and have a panel discussion about this topic in front of a live audience. And that event was totally put together by me. Now, putting the events together isn't something that I necessarily do. What I certainly do is I look at an area where I think people need to know about something, and I'll recruit speakers together. And I've done that for people like UKSG. So I'm not an event organizer, because I know that's your area, but I'm more like, I think of myself as a fantasy football kind of person that I think that'd be a great speaker and that'd be a great speaker, and let's get them together. And I've come up with an idea of a way we can badge it and such like. Other things that I've done, which are not necessarily technology enabled. 10 years ago, I started writing retreats. And that was because I had to finish a book on altmetrics that I'd been commissioned to do. And I was struggling to do it. And the writing retreats called Write Club have run for the last 10 years. And I did a quick check on the data since lockdown, see how many people had attended from the University of Sheffield. And it was just shy of 600 people had been to these sessions. And this is where people get together and write. And it's based on a Pomodoro technique where you take 5-minute breaks, you write for 25 minutes. We have yoga videos, we have meditation start and things like that. And some of them I just play music throughout the day and people listen to music in the background. And it's a real good way to bring people across the campus together. That is a sort of what I would say is the kind of the antithesis of what I do, which is to kind of push out technology.
Yeah.
And to promote things, whether that's altmetrics, whether that's the use of podcasting, whether that's the use of making videos, whether that's writing blogs, social media and such like. So I'm an advocate for all of those things. And I think that's what I'm kind of largely known for. But the kind of the Write Club was a byproduct. Some of the other things I've done is I started a series about 15 years ago called Bite Size that still runs at Sheffield, which are 20-minute talks on technologies or ideas to help people work better. I was the first person at Sheffield to kind of spot massive online open courses. And we ran the first 3 of those, I think in 2012, 2013, and we had 8,000 students sign up for them. And again, that was me spotting something. So, and getting buy-in.
It does sound very much, I think you said at the very beginning, you're a bit of a problem solver. I think you're also sounds like you're a bit of a magpie. You're just
Absolutely.
like, there's a thing over here and there's a thing over here and let's put them together and see what we can come up with.
Absolutely. I've been definitely a magpie for about 15 years and I'm a chambrarian, as I've been told many times. So I'm someone who affiliates very strongly with the academic library community. I know loads of them. I've spoke at dozens of library conferences. I've given invited talks at CILIP and International Business Librarians Conference, and International Clinical Librarians Conference. I'm not a librarian. I have probably a librarian's brain that I like to curate things, put things in order, and like to naturally share and help people and solve problems, which I think is a lot of what librarians do. But the other flip side, as one previous manager said to me many years ago, I'm also a bit like a bull at a gate. And I've changed that but the problem with the bull at the gate sometimes is that you rush in and you do get things wrong. And so I've sort of become a little more pragmatic. And maybe that's the thing with age. As you get older, you become a bit more, I won't say conservative, but a little more cautious. And I'll still take risks and I'll still push things out. And I'm still prepared to annoy people because I think I might be right about something and I want them to come around to that way of thinking because I think the evidence is there. And I am a practitioner first and foremost, but I am strongly underpinned by evidence. So when I'm telling you to do something, then there is an evidence base, hopefully, behind a lot of it, even though the evidence might be weak or not substantiated at the time because it's early days. I'm certainly not a futurologist, but I've always tried to lead from the front and I've always tried to bring people along with me and certainly work with the idea of bringing people along with me who want to come. I learned many years ago that you can really try and, you can take a horse to water, but you can't get it to drink. And there are people in the academic world who unfortunately will never, ever change. And they're not worth the investment of your limited time and energy. But there is this huge swathe in the middle, the kind of in that kind of diffusion of innovation curve. There's that huge group of people who are interested. And I've tried to be attuned to the issues that impact them, the inequalities that impact them, the time issues, particularly if you're part-time, if you're female, you take the caring responsibilities invariably and all those problems. So Write Club is a good example of that because since I've run it, and we've had nearly 600 people attend since 2020, on top of all those who attended the 5-6 years before that. It is roughly 95% female attended.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the people who most need that space, perhaps, that somewhere to
I think so. I think that they're more likely to they're more likely to struggle time-wise because of other demands. They also, I think, are possibly more open to working that way as well. I think that might be a reason as to it, that they actually think there's nothing wrong about going into a room with a bunch of people to write together. I think there's a lot of blokes who might go, oh, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a little bit of that. But I think largely it is down to equity and kind of cultural sort of reasons why women to attend those sessions. So I'm pleased with that, because I do want to bring equity to research communications, because it's not just those who are resource poor, time poor. I think it's also that research, particularly in institutions, has a habit of very much going with the easy big wins. And they might be, that's won £10 million. That project's won £10 million. That project is going to solve this particular cancer, etc. And a lot of the very, very small projects that make some really, really decent societal impact and some change get overlooked because it's one person in a department doing one thing that just is not seen hot or sexy enough or attention grabbing. And I think that there's more to be done to give these people a leg up, because these little seed investments of research and time and these little pots of money can lead to big things that lead to a wider societal impact.
Yeah, definitely. And I think not only in terms of helping the research together, but like you say, the help that you can do to get that research out into the world and the difference that that can make. Because often the big projects will have a budget for things. They might even have a member of staff on the team who can do all their communications and get everything out there. But like you say, those little projects, if there's somebody who's working across the organization, can give them a little bit of time, a little bit of help, can make a big difference to them, can't it?
Absolutely. You know, a little bit of money can go the right way if it's used right. And the problem with a lot of big projects is when they put in bids, you know, historically anyway, and I think things are changing for the better slowly, but historically it was very much a tick box. We'll have a website, we'll use Twitter, we'll do this. And there wasn't really much thought for it. Or the alternative was, we don't do anything, we get to the end and, oh my goodness, we now need to start thinking about telling people, and the pot of money has been taken away from us now because it's at the end of the project and we can't do anything. So it's a bit slapdash at times. It's ill thought. I like the idea of thinking about things in the longer term as a campaign, possibly. And that's very hard to achieve. And I think that does take resource. But I think if people can think about that, and I think this is particularly important when you are working directly with the public, because one of the problems with research is it parachutes into a cohort in society, it does some work and it pulls out. And I think that these problems are often endemic. Working in health research, we're looking at often endemic problems that are very wicked, that can't be solved by one necessarily solution or person. And that thinking about campaigns extends that. And it also kind of, I think, helps with the civic duty of what research should do. And one of the problems that we get is that stories are often told of in the frame of £5 million won by the university of whatever. Yeah. And I think the money is so important. Obviously, it allows you to do these things. But really, the story is what's the impact and who's the lives and what's the breakthrough going to be? Because I think that's what the public care about. They don't know if £5 million is a lot of money. In a lot of cases, obviously, it isn't. Yeah. But what they want to know is, will my mum beat this illness? Yeah. Will my dad get well? Yeah. Will I, and I think that's quite the important thing. The money, I don't think newspapers are interested in the money, usually. They're interested in the actual impact. So, but I also think that for a large extent, and this is across the board, whether you're working as an individual trying to do things or working as a group who may have an administrator, I think it's all about little 1% increments, trying to make everything a little bit better. How can we make our comms a bit more visible? How can we make this bit of work a bit more impactful? How can we actually manage to reach this cohort of society? How can we manage to reach this policymaker? And they're all little 1% that you have to think about all the time, because You think about going to something in Sheffield. I forgot the gentleman's name now, but he's a kind of a sports psychologist who worked with. I don't want to say his name because I'll get it wrong, but who worked with British Cycling. And the reason British Cycling was such a huge success throughout the noughties was that he took this idea. His business is called Chimp Management. I want to say Stephen Peters. I could be wrong, Steve Peters, but he went and they looked at 1% increments, and those increments could be washing your hands after you've been to the loo to reduce infection, because if cyclists catch a cold, they can't practice.
Yeah.
It's little things like that.
Yeah.
Doing something to this piece of the technology to improve it.
Yeah.
Habit forming. So I think that's quite important.
And it all adds up over time, doesn't it? These little improvements here and there. It doesn't always need to be about the big splash, about the big development, like you say, the things that get reported, these big grant wins and things like that. And actually, at the end of the day, it doesn't always make much difference. So one thing I think people will be really curious to know is how you got into doing this work. You mentioned having been, doing learning technology and things like that. But yeah, tell us about your journey.
So, well, first of all, I want to clarify, it was Steve Peters. So I just want to make sure. I just
did
a quick Google search. Professor Steve Peters. He's the gentleman. How did I get into it? I was late. I completely flunked at school. I didn't have a great start to life. I was taken from my parents as a baby. So life didn't start great. And I flunked at school, had a good time throughout my teens and my 20s, and then decided I needed to get an education and went off to college. Cut long story short, went and did some A-levels, age 26, felt massively out of my depth, then managed to get a place at Sheffield on their journalism degree, which was, at the time, I think they had 1,400 applicants. And I was very lucky to get on as a mature student and felt out of my depth, but it was an amazing experience. And then went off to be a journalist for a short while, sports journalist for the Press Association, and did journalism as well. I was doing journalism in the background, and I've continued to do that in capacity, doing music and culture. But I saw a job at the University of Sheffield and went there doing their interlibrary loans.
Okay.
And it was a very overwhelming job. It was a paper-based job. And after about a year, I went off to an event and came back and said, I think we need to digitize this system. This was in my academic department. And we were doing around 600 interlibrary loans a month, which was quite a lot. And I digitized it, and we had a system for doing this. And I did that for a few years and started doing other things that were not part of my job. So I redesigned the library in Google SketchUp in 3D. And I started doing just various stuff that were not part of my job. And this particular guy, very esteemed academic in the evidence-based synthesis world and evidence-based librarianship, he's led in that and innovated from the start. He's the kind of the godfather of a lot of stuff. Andrew Booth decided there was a job for me, and he managed to get funding with another professor, and Professor Wendy Baird. And in 2007, they created a job for me, which was basically looking at stuff like innovating the library and doing things around, I started doing blogs, started a YouTube channel around 2008, 2009, and just was left to my own devices, and have been for 18 years, very much under multiple managers. So I took the job exactly where I wanted, which has been a huge privilege. And I've been trusted. It comes with an awful lot of downfalls and responsibilities and concerns. It's not all wonderful, but I've been blessed that I've been supported in that area to go off and do that. So what I would have said is that probably around 2007, 2008, I probably was a proto-learning technologist. I was very interested in the learning side of things. So I was involved in the teaching, and I was doing teaching myself. And it was around 2010, 2011, I remember sitting down with the guy who was the head of our sort of section at the time, Professor Simon Dixon, who recently retired. He's a health economist. And he said, you need to figure out what you want to do. Do you want to go and do research, or do you want to go and do teaching? Because I was sort of straddling both to some extent. And I went away and thought, the learning technologists are starting to really take off in the institution. There were people there who'd been doing that for years before me, who'd been doing that in various capacities. And the whole movement was certainly really, really getting going on institutions. And I thought, actually, there's nothing happening in terms of research. And I'm not talking about being a research technician. I'm not talking about research communications. It was purely about the digital side of things, the digital literacy. That's everything from Google apps. And I was very much the lead for Google at Sheffield, not implementing it, but certainly being the person for IT to go out and speak to departments and show them. Because prior to us getting Google in around 2010, I was already using Google in the institution. And again, this is before we're thinking about information governance. I was using the Google email to get set up accounts.
Yeah.
I'd got Blogger running. I'd got YouTube running. I was using SketchUp and stuff like that. So I decided that I'd go down the research route, and that was where it was for me. And that's really where I've been ever since, underpinned by information and technology literacy. So people do invite me to give talks about technology and adoption, and that's something I've learned a lot about. How do you get people to buy in stuff, and what are the issues about that?
So yeah, really, that's making me think of the work you've done recently about the move of organizations away from Twitter and towards other platforms. And like you say, it's that period of adoption and what makes people move and when do they move and that sort of thing. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. And what I've sort of learned is that universities are herds. They kind of follow each other eventually, and they sit and watch what others are doing. And there's not really truly that many that are truly free thinking or radical. You'll get a university that will go, we're going to step away from these rankings. We're not going to play part of that anymore. That's a very brave decision to do. And we're going to do that. But I think they do follow quite often in herds. I think they're very slow to move as a whole. I predicted that with Twitter when Elon Musk took over. I said, well, people are going to jump because you can make a decision as an individual. You can make it on an ethical choice. You can make it on a political choice. You can make it on a mental health decision or personal decision. But as an organization, it's really tricky. And it's proving to be so with Twitter that they may be investing elsewhere, but the majority are still not jumping off that one yet. I don't think things will change on Twitter, so it will be interesting to see how that one plays out.
And then you mentioned also looking at how things like AI might be starting to come in to organization, what difference that makes in places like universities. What have you found there?
Well, I'm really looking at it from the perspective of dissemination, because that's what I'm interested in. And what I found largely is if I was to sum it up, it would be, let's not get carried away just yet or not get ahead of ourselves. I think there are probably an awful lot of researchers out there who are leveraging it really well now. I think they're probably got some really good workflows and they're being very savvy. Whether they're telling other people about it will vary from person to person. But I think we're probably seeing, for all of those, we're seeing probably 2 or 3 more that are doing it very badly and potentially also in a corrupt way. So the issue I've got with AI is certainly from the platforms I've looked at is it's being shoehorned into a lot of stuff. And I think it's detracting away from the quality of the said platform. And I think that people not necessarily are in a position to make a good value judgment as to whether that works well. So what would be good would be more conversations. It's something I want to think more about, maybe even develop a course on in terms of dissemination. I know initial conversations, and I get this, you speak to perhaps people, media people who might work in press, very cautious and nervous about it because they're worried about it undermining their roles. And I get that. I get that why people in the arts and humanities are particularly wary of AI. But I do think that it is an opportunity in this area. I think it's an opportunity for accessibility. I think it's an opportunity to develop some very inventive and creative ways of working. A good example would be you look at image creation just a year ago with something like Midjourney or ChatGPT. The quality of the images were pretty crap. Even if you had a good prompt, if you wrote something quite decent, it still came out with wonky hands and skewed faces. Whereas now, if you do something, you can get something that's quite decent with a relatively straightforward prompt. That's my experience of late. That's good. But again, I think it goes back to the issue of inequalities, because with all of these AI tools, they've got to make money, and to get the real good stuff, you're going to have to pay for it. It's the old Web 2.0 world that we had. If you remember 2004 to around 2007 was a huge expansion of web tools that came out that just did everything. And it was amazing. And then you realize actually a lot of them aren't that good and they don't improve your life. And a lot of them don't work well. And then some of the ones that did work well have been created by a PhD student who realizes that he or she needs to get an income and that's not paying them, and it disappears. And I think we'll see this with AI. I think we'll see platforms rise, fall. We'll see people who can't leverage it make money, and we'll also see an awful lot of gump out there as a result. So I think it's interesting times, and I don't know what the situation is for universities, but I would guess that many are taking very different approaches, and some are trying to lock down as much as they can. They see it as an information governance issue. They see it as a literacy issue. And perhaps some of the students might even be better equipped than some of the staff in using these tools and finding ways to do that. And some of them might be running with it and doing some really interesting stuff and having some really interesting conversations. I know at Sheffield, there's some really good people that are behind this, that are doing some very interesting things, sharing things that I don't understand, around data and code and how to carry out research. And they're doing some really, really good stuff. But for the majority of academics, they probably are a little bit bewildered right now as to not just how do they use it, but what can they use it for? And I think
I would say that's exactly how I feel. So.
And it just takes one person to use it in a really fantastic way, and everyone goes, wow. And that's always been the case with technology, isn't it? Someone goes off.
You don't know you need it, so then you don't see how it fits into your life, and it takes a while to actually figure out. It's like when they invented text messaging and they didn't think anybody would want it, and then everybody went, oh, actually this is really good. So we shall see. But one technology that you have really embraced is podcasting, isn't it? That's how our paths crossed in the first place. What is it that you find so interesting or enjoyable about podcasting?
So again, going back many years, the journey starts when I was probably about 12, 11, listening to Radio Luxembourg under the covers as a little boy and fascinated by radio, and then becoming an avid record collector at the age of 11, making my own radio shows called Tat on 2.
Excellent. Are there recordings of this anyway?
There isn't. They were on cassette and they were given to friends along with Tat on 2 pens, which were pens with the word Tat on 2 liquid papered onto them. And so I would have been about 13, 14 at the time. I'd record a record and then record a microphone of me talking in between and pause tape, do the new stuff. And then I got into DJing in the sort of mid 80s. I became a hip hop DJ. And so I can scratch and do all that sort of stuff. Not as good as I used to, but I did all that. And then in 1991 became a pirate radio DJ for 6 years, and was on a few stations, a couple of very infamous ones in Sheffield, very well known, Fantasy FM and SCR, which when I've been featured in interviews, you get colleagues in meetings and they'll say, were you the same person that was featured in this article that was in this magazine? Which has happened. It's like, yeah. So I did that. And then I went to do journalism, which included broadcast journalism. And I then, when sort of probably the mid 2000s, I was approached by a radio station online, a hip hop radio station. It was an international one known. And I was persuaded to kind of start doing a show, which I did for a few years. And then I moved on to another station and I did that. And the weird thing is, I took quite a while to bring it into a professional setting. So I didn't do my first podcasts until I think my first ones were around 2018, 2019. And they're one person podcasts. It's me talking about a thing scripted. Right, yeah. So it's talking about, so I did those and we didn't have the facilities, I don't think, at Sheffield at the time to really do anything properly. So I did that. But I found a report I wrote in around 2007 around customer relationship management and how we approach students and what other universities were doing. And I was asked to dig the report out a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And I looked through the conclusions. And one of the key conclusions in 2007 was we should be doing podcasts.
Goodness me, that you even knew what. I don't think I'd even heard of podcasts in 2007.
And so I was there's very few recommendations, and that was one of them. And this document is around 2007. It may even be slightly early, about 2006, but it took me about 12 years to actually do it.
Yeah.
And that's not like me. I'm normally quick at turning around. So I then started doing a podcast called Research Records, which is a cross between Desert Island Discs and the Life Scientific. And we've had Jim Al-Khalili from that Life Scientific as a guest. And that was with Tony Ryan, who's a chemist, OBE, and Marie Kinsey, who's a emeritus professor of journalism. And it's a journey about music and academic life. And very proud of it. It's been a really good series. I presume it's come to an end as I step away from Sheffield as the producer. I don't think the hosts, I'm speaking on their behalf. I've told them that I'll find them another producer, but I think they don't want to continue with me going. So I think they're very sad about me going, if I'm honest. So, and I produced one of my own called Communicable Research, which is about health, communicating health research. And I also produced one called the Overnight Podcast. So that's really my journey. After Sheffield, I have an idea for a podcast series, which I think will be good if I can get the guests. I think it'll bring something extra to, I think, your podcast brings something different and includes, a wealth of really, really good guests. And hopefully I can kind of contribute to that pool of podcasts, because I know you're an advocate. I love podcasts.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you were to say to me, if you're on a desert island, what would you prefer, having a radio or TV? Radio wins hands down.
Oh, me as well. Radio anytime.
I still think it's very early days for podcasts, because I think that what I like about podcasts, and I'm sure you found this experience, it gives a safe space for people to talk. It's not like working with the media. It is an opportunity in a safe space. And this is, I think it's quite an important point, and I'm waffling on, but where universities really miss out on podcasting, and I think this is huge, and it's the same with video, is that for prospective students, it gives them a insight into the people who may teach them if they go to that institution, because all they might see is a bit of text with no photograph on a staff profile, or what they might see is a photograph with some text. And I don't know if he or she is any good.
Yeah.
But if I hear them talking and I think these know their stuff, and that's the kind of person I want to sit down in the lecture room and hear.
Yeah.
It's a massive opportunity.
It is. And you could, the little snippets, just 5 minutes here and there could make a huge difference, isn't it? It doesn't have to be a huge commitment. So yeah, also big fan of audio. Well, I think we should keep an eye on the time, but I do like to ask all of my guests if they had a magic wand, what they would change about the world that they work in. So what would you like to use your magic wand for?
That is a really, really tough question, because there is absolutely so much wrong in higher education, sadly, as we know, perennial problems. If I had a magic wand, I think if I was like king for a day, we would be in this position where absolutely everybody has guaranteed time to carry out CPD. And I am lucky that I've been able to do a job where largely my job is continual CPD. So I'm continually developing and learning. And I got the bug for learning late in the day when I went to college, and it's not left me since. And I think that there's an awful lot of people, and I think particularly, and I know a lot of people, people you speak to work in professional services, but a lot of their colleagues will not give themselves time for CPD, or will not have the time given to them, and they'll have line managers who don't support them. And I think an organization in higher education that does not carry out its own R&R and its own development, and I'm not talking about let's have a day out for well-being or a day out for dealing with difficult conversations and things like that, which are useful, or resilience, which we're seeing often, but it's about the things that make you better at your job. And actually you care about your job more, because I think if you're better and then you care about the work, you take more interest in it and you try and develop it and change it. And I think the really valuable professional services people are the ones who try and change their environment for the better. So they don't just sit there and go, I do that because the person before me did it and that's the way they did it. You look at it and go, oh, right, that would work better if I did this. And I want the freedom to do that. And you do that by getting CPD and by being given the opportunity to train and to learn and to be given the protected time to do that.
Yeah.
I think the organization, for every hour of that, you get many more hours back in cost savings. And I think that would be the magic one, because I think professional services increasingly, and there's been that problem for years around presenteeism, be at your desk. You can't take time out to go and do something that's going to be beneficial for you and your colleagues. And I think, sadly, that will only probably get worse as the current climate, but that's the thing I'd fix.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic suggestion. And yeah, definitely this access to professional development has come up many times on this podcast with many different guests and also other conversations I've had. And it does seem to be a real problem, and it's holding people back. And it need not be. As you say, these are meant to be educational organisations, so why don't they prioritise the education of their own staff? But yes, let's hope you are king of the world one day. And thank you so much for coming along. If people want to get in touch with you, find out about your work, where would you suggest that they go? Where do you hang out most online?
I'm on Blue Sky. I mean, the jury's still out as to whether that's going to really take off. I think it's bubbling away at the moment. It'd be interesting to see how it goes. I hope it does pick up. That needs organizations to get on there a bit more to make that happen. But I've got a website, andytattersall.com, and there's a link tree. So you'll find that on Blue Sky. If you search for Andy Tattersall, you'll find me, or you'll find a professor at Liverpool, and I'm not. I'm not.
And you're not that
him.
one.
And hopefully I've largely got him knocked off the page rankings like a good information professional.
Fantastic. Oh, well, I'll get those links, put them in the show notes. But for now, thank you so much for coming along and sharing your story.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.